your writing career, HorrorTree.
Righty. So we are very happy to have you on today on this episode, this very special episode of this interview for Horror Tree magazine. I'm the novelette Ivana, and we're very happy to have you on, Meg Smith, for this special episode featuring women in horror for Women in Horror Month in February.
Thank you so much for having me, and especially for including me in this Women in Horror celebration.
We're so excited to have you here. And we love the Women in Horror Month, seeing all the dark fiction writers that are women in publishing, short fiction writers, novelists, all of them. It's just really cool. Screenwriters, all of it. I love dark fiction, and hosting this series for Horror Tree magazine is really cool. And I feel like this is very fitting. So it's very nice to meet you. And for the beginning of this interview, would you like to introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners?
Sure. I'm Meg Smith, and I am a writer of fiction and poetry. And I'm also been a journalist for about 30 years. I've been, in terms of my horror fiction and poetry, I've been blessed to be published in many places. Most recently, that would include Dark Moon Digest, The Horror Scene, Starline, which is the publication of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association, and many others. And so I'm blessed to have my work supported by these publications. I live in Lowell, Massachusetts. And I'm also an event producer. My late husband and I were very much involved in the Lowell Celebrates Kerouac Festival, which honors the author Jack Kerouac, who was born here. And I also produce an event called the Edgar Allan Poe Show, which honors Poe's visits here to Lowell, Mass. When he came here. And I live here with my husband, Derek, in our beautiful house in Lowell, Mass. With our 3 cats, and who are not official guests, but they may pop in.
Including the black cat.
Yep, exactly.
That's very, very sweet. Alrighty. So thank you so much for introducing what you do and how all of your wonderful work. And I'll go ahead and ask some of the interview questions.
Sure thing.
Alrighty, so our first question is coffee or tea?
Well, I think it depends kind of on the morning. Being Irish, I'm first generation Irish, so I enjoy a nice cup of Irish tea in the morning, but I certainly enjoy my American cup of coffee. And let us not forget to drink enough water. This is a bottle of smart water here.
That's always a good piece of advice.
Yep.
I usually get my water through lemonade, unfortunately. And I've been told many times that's not included as water because it has
that's not official water.
It's not official water.
Oh dear.
I know, right? So I'm trying to learn better water drinking habits. But I love drinking coffee. I drink probably 2 cups of coffee a day. One of them is usually espresso in the form of macchiato.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And I love tea at night, any sort of tea. Chamomile, Earl Grey, matcha, with coconut milk like Zendaya.
Yeah. And I'm also a fan of Diet Coke. Journalists like to think of that as the breakfast of champions, morning, noon, and night.
Oh, right.
So yeah.
Yeah.
I got a thing.
I do love caffeine-free soda from Whole Foods. I try to get one of theirs because I drink so much caffeine with coffee. I try to drink caffeine-free sodas. Try and not have so many heart palpitations.
Right. We keep trying. That's what counts, I think.
Yeah. Alrighty. So what do you hope to see the publishing industry do or continue to do to further elevate women in horror?
So I think, first of all, that's a great question. I will say that I do believe that the publishing industry as a whole is starting to recognize more women as horror writers. And I would add to that it is starting to recognize increasingly diversity overall amongst writers of horror, and including writers of color, writers of the LGBTQ community, disabled writers, as well as female writers, and basically people who are bringing, because we all have our own different life experiences, bringing more voices and more kinds of stories to tell. So I'm very happy to see that happening. I'd like to see it continue and grow. I also think that one thing that perhaps has helped in many places, including writing, is that we now have a lot of remote tools that literally, I think, break down a lot of boundaries, including geographical ones. We can have like virtual interviews, just like we're having now, virtual conversations. We have podcasts, we have interviews on YouTube, and we have many ways to connect. And I think that also helps to serve to get the word out about, in this case, particularly women writers, but just more of the, I would say, the groundbreaking and new frontiers of horror writing that's happening.
I think that's a wonderful point. I'm glad that the publishing industry is committing itself to being more diverse in so many different ways. And then also definitely highlighting the dark fiction and the horror writers with different demographics, because I feel like dark fiction is so intriguing. It's one of the most commercial versions of fiction writing there is. And I feel like making sure that that's diverse, it brings so many different perspectives into the forefront through the stories, through the fiction, and it just opens it up to a whole new type of variety. And I think that's really exciting, that we're really in exciting times with the publishing industry for that reason. And I love that we do stuff virtually more now. I mean, there's whole book festivals now that are virtual.
Exactly.
And it's like there's so much accessibility now. And I do feel like, the pandemic kind of ushered that in even more.
I think that's very true.
Yeah, I hope it stays, because more people now have the ability to participate who maybe couldn't afford plane rides to get to
Exactly.
And
Right.
they shouldn't be isolated to not being able to participate just because they can't take a plane. Like, we should be able to have sources like this, podcasts, YouTube series, virtual events. Everyone can attend so that we can open up publishing to every demographic, even those in different, financial brackets, because
Right.
they're still valuable to the industry. They still have great stories to tell, and we should still hear them.
Exactly, because to your point, there are, and when one thinks about the generally speaking, writing can be a very rewarding profession, but can be very modest in terms of how lucrative it is. And as a consequence, so yes, exactly to your point, there may be writers who are no less passionate or committed, but can't, say, necessarily afford to go to a convention, or if a person has different kinds of limitations on their ability, maybe even driving a car or getting on a plane to go someplace is a much greater undertaking for that person than it might be for somewhere else. So yeah, I suppose that the one unexpected realization from the pandemic is, we have these tools, and we have had these tools. So why not use them to break down those barriers? And I would just add too, as far as helping to promote women writers, as women writers, we should not be shy about putting the word out for ourselves, because I think sometimes for women, even nowadays, that women may have a sense of like, well, I shouldn't be showing off too much or tooting my own horn too much. And in fact, if you are writing a book, a novel, a book of poetry, or such as I have, you have to get the word out. Yeah. So we have to also be our own advocates, and advocates for the other writers around us that are also on the same journey. So we have a voice, and so we need to use that. And to me, that's just as important as anything that, say, the publishing industry might do. We have to be that voice for ourselves and for one another.
I think that's wonderful. I especially love one new thing I've been seeing recently, where authors, like published authors, are interviewing newbies on the field when they have their debut books coming out, like on Instagram and stuff. And I feel like that's one of the great ways to support a newbie on the field, where an established author interviews basically that newbie and kind of does their release day event, or kind of ushers in their cover reveal or something. I feel like it's almost like passing the baton, nurturing somebody who's new in the same genre, and bringing that author's, kind of platform and kind of utilizing it to help another person who's coming in who's new and is probably like inexperienced and is hoping to establish themselves too. So that's another thing I've been seeing recently, kind of like author events, where it's really helpful to people who are releasing debut novels, and I love that. I love seeing those.
Me too.
And the graphics are always so colorful and vibrant. I always take notes because I make promo material for a lot of release events for different authors and stuff. So I'm always taking notes about what's cool and what's in. Alrighty. So what do you hope is the takeaway for readers of your work and or books?
Sure. Well, first I'll just mention this is my, I'm really excited because I have my first actual collection of nonfiction books. This is The Plague Confessor. It's a collection of my short stories.
Cool.
And I have 5 poetry books. I also have my own bookmarks. Remember what I said about how we have to promote ourselves? Think about the swag, think about all the ways you can do that.
Yeah.
So this is Night's Island, and it is my most recent book of poetry. And what I hope people will take away, first of all, when they're reading my stories, I really hope they take away an experience where they have felt like they, could be on a journey in that experience, where I feel like the best stories are when you kind of get to check out of your life for a little while and you really feel that you are into the adventure of whatever that the characters in that story, whatever adventure that they're on. And I hope even though these are works of fiction, I hope that they will see that the stories are told for me with a sincere heart.
Yeah.
I write from things that I know that I can be true to, whether that is, say, like a body horror story or science fiction, or maybe something that's a little bit more psychological horror, what a lot of people are calling quiet horror these days. Or humor. I'd like them to see that through all of that, I do have a sense of humor. And I think that humor is sometimes doesn't get as much credit as it should. But if a writer has a sense that even in the most terrifying story that the writers themselves still are not taking themselves too seriously, I think, I think that's sort of one of the kind of maybe hidden elements that I think can help a reader feel a connection with that writer. So that's what I really hope that they will find in my writing.
That's nice. That's very nice. I like it where you were saying that it seems like the author's not even taking themselves even that seriously. And it's I feel like that adds extra character to a novel when it's kind of like the author is like, it almost like breaks the fourth wall, but in a literary sense.
Sure.
Yeah. I love those moments. I feel like that's kind of like flow of conscience type of writing, I think they call it. So what advice would you give about pitching a horror story?
So what I would do, and what I think first of all is most critical, is I find that the best writers are also really good readers. In terms of the horror genre, I think a lot of people get into even writing horror because they first of all love that genre. They start reading and they get excited about what they're reading and they feel like they can relate to what that writer has to say. And I would say, so first of all, be a good reader. And I think that also requires having some humility in ourselves, that writing is a craft. It's a craft that you learn. I feel as a writer, I would like to be a lifelong learner and always be working at that craft. So I think, first of all, being a good reader and a very broad and diverse reader too, I would say. So I think that's, one of the first things. And another is to have, it does take a little courage to be objective about one's own writing. Really make that story the best that you can make it. Don't be afraid of rewriting. Maybe read it out loud. Sometimes our ear picks up things in the story. I said at a reading recently that I think reading our own writing out loud helps keeps us honest.
Yeah.
So when you're pitching the story, be informed, be also a consumer and supporter of those publications. Buy a sample copy, whether it's in print or online, and really read, what kinds of stories does this publication really feature, because they all, even you could take, say, a dozen horror publications, and they will all have their own different personality and different character. Yeah. So say you might have say, for example, a magazine really leans more towards science fiction and stories about adventures maybe in space or different dimensions. So think about, is that really the best place, say, to send a story that's more a gothic horror novel about something that's maybe happening in a creepy house or something like that? Well, it might. But really think about when you're presenting that story, that you have done due diligence, and that you are not simply looking for a place for your story to live. You are trying to present something that is a good fit for that publication, that honors the spirit of that publication, and that you as a writer are not just trying to earn publication credits. Of course, we are doing that, of course, but it also needs to be something that serves that publication and be respectful of the editor's decision, whether it's yes or no, or could you revise this a little bit. An editor or publisher has the right to say no to any story they don't think is a good fit. Part of being a good writer, I think, is accepting rejections professionally, because that is part of the work. If they have some suggestions for revisions, maybe think about what it is they're saying and see if you can make that work. And I think just when like in any job, when you present yourself professionally, when you speak and interact professionally, you are not only presenting a story that you'd like them to buy, but you're presenting yourself, as someone that, hey, I want to do business with this person. This is the person that I can build a partnership with. So that's really my best and strongest advice.
Yes, it's like the character of the author comes out in how they handle rejection a lot of times, and you kind of get a sense of who they are and how they are as an editor. Because I also am an editor for a digital first dark fiction publishing company called Aesthetic Press. And so I get a lot of submissions and I have to send out rejections. As well as acceptances. The acceptances are funner. They're super funner. But yeah, I had to send out rejections sometimes. One time I sent out a R&R to have them revise it and resubmit it. Mm-hmm. And they handled it so well that I was pretty much sold on accepting them no matter what they submitted back to me, because I knew I could edit it to get it where I thought it needed to be, even if it was after acceptance. So I even accepted that particular novel, even when I knew it still wasn't quite where it needed to be, because I knew that the character of the author was like, you're kind of really great. I think you have a vision for this novel, and I'm going to help you get to the vision. But I feel like it's someone I can work with. And right. So her character carried her book, even though I know that her book is still not where it needs to be. And even there was a little bit of a change in the publication date, because I still want to make sure it's edited so it's right. Because what I want to do is submit it to video game publishers. I feel like it has adaptation potential. And so I really believe in her story. I believe in her. And even changing the release date, she was totally cool about it. And I'm like, this is an author I just want to keep working with, because I'm like, this person has a great personality, a great character, a great story that needs a little bit of help, but still a great story. But she deserves, for somebody to nurture the potential here. And it's true that much character goes a long way, very long way. Because if it was just based on the book, I probably wouldn't have put in so much effort. It was based on her and the
Right.
book.
You both made that connection. You both
Uh-huh.
crossed that bridge to meet each
Yeah,
other.
yeah, which was great. And yeah, even other stories, if I feel like they have potential, they have a like great potential. I need to like there was one story I did reject that was great, really great, because I didn't like the author. Because there was the way that he was talking to me through when we were sorting out the contract, and I was like, I think this guy's gonna give me trouble, lots of trouble. This guy can be a headache. No book is worth that. So I actually rejected something I loved because the author was the exact opposite of what you want to deal with. So it's like personality goes a long way, very long way. And yeah, it's about professionalism and it's about still, pitching. I like what you said about pitching to publications that match your genre, that match the themes. Because a lot of times people will even submit during Pitch Wars, the virtual event for pitching to agents. They'll submit to agents randomly, and the agents actually get really frustrated with that. It's like, I have a list of what I'm looking for in my profile. Please follow the list. Don't waste my time. So it's like paying attention to what the publications, what the agents want, to respect their time even, and they'll appreciate that in the long run for sure. Um, what does the act of writing itself mean to you?
Well, for me, it's like it means a lot of things. It can mean a kind of meditation. Again, just like reading can be checking out of everything else in your life for a while. Writing can have that process. It can be thrilling. It can be a little hair pulling and frustrating.
True.
And I think no matter how long a person is, working at being a writer, they're going to have, those moments. I really, if I kind of have an idea, say for a story, I try to write down that idea for the story, as quickly as I can, even if it's just a few notes, a premise that I have to come back later. And I have sometimes written a story in 2 days, say, and sent it and had an acceptance, within another 24-hour period. That happens. I have also written a story and say maybe gotten to a point where something really exciting is about to happen. And you have this feeling like, okay, what's going to happen? And
Yeah.
I may put that story aside until I can resolve in my mind what's a logical next step in this story that is also going to be worth the reader's while to go, from start to finish with that story. So, and I think part of, one thing I will say that to me is critical as a writer, part of that process also is that we, I think, have to be curators of ourselves when we're writing. What I mean by that is, it can be, we live in a world, we live in a society where there are many kind of assumptions, kind of biases, kind of conventions about how people think, speak, act, look, behave. And as a writer, what we don't want to do, I don't think, is to fall down into those things.
Yeah.
For example, and I would never see myself as like the police of writing, but really look at the characters in a story and say, okay, are these like credible, believable people, or am I just casting them into something based on my own maybe personal prejudice or bias, or how I think that they should act, think, feel, look? Or am I making and I'll give you a perfect example. I was writing a story and there was one incidental character in the story, and she was a character who was like looking at this mother and daughter in the supermarket. And I started to think about, well, what would that person look like? And I will freely admit, in our culture, we are kind of obsessed with body image. The first thing that flashed into my mind was, would this person be overweight? And then I thought, no, wait a second. That has nothing, that's like equating a person's weight with how they think and act. And that's an example of what I would say where we find ourselves just taking for granted. Oh, the readers will accept this.
Yeah.
And so right away, within a split second, I said, no, that's not where I should go or anyone should go. And so I did something else to the character. I gave her some different sorts of clothes and mannerisms and gestures.
Yeah.
Because if we say that we're serious about being a better society, being better people, better citizens, then that means being better writers too. And that means that you're addressing the humanity in your characters and you being honest with yourself, with ourselves about that. And then, at the end of all that, I think that not only that makes us, I think, better citizens, but it also makes the writing better, honestly. Because because then the writer's like, tell me more. This is a multi-dimensional place. Tell me more. Now you're giving me something that I wouldn't just assume, on my own. Tell me more. I mean, that's what we want to hear as writers, right? Tell me more.
Yes, exactly. And it's like it's expanding our view of certain mannerisms. I love how you put that. Like, I guess the sort of default way we would have thought of this character's mannerisms as it would have been probably an overweight person, I suppose. But I like how you changed it to kind of broaden the perspective of these mannerisms, these characteristics, to make her body language speak in the same way, to have her clothes speak in a similar tone. And I like how you were creative and that you were committed to having basically a better portrayal instead of adhering to the same stereotypes, I guess, that have come before. And it's like that does make us a better society, not adhering to stereotypes and trying to find different ways to communicate things without, isolating or putting certain people into a box that they end up being portrayed as in real life and then getting bullied for and at different ages, even, not just in schools, but also even as adults who are at the workplace or anything. And so that does make us a better society. And I love that you're mindful of that. And I would hope that many more authors will be too. Thank you. So in your opinion, what is the best TV or movie adaptation of a book?
Wow, that is a super great question. And one of the things that I'm in love with about that question is that I, both as a consumer and someone who writes, and also being a Gen Xer, we kind of like to kid that we were raised, on television, because we in fact, I feel that it was actually a fantastic generation to grow up with all kinds of breaking new grounds in television.
Oh, yeah,
and film. It was like, I mean, really and truly, like I can remember, being 5, 6, 7 years old. You turn on the television, and as a child, your impression of the world is there were people of all different backgrounds together, working together, whether it's a comedy, whether it's serious, whether it's a cartoon, whatever. And it doesn't. It doesn't make you stop and think, oh, look what's happening on the TV. You're a child and you are just accepting that it's a very vibrant and diverse world, and you're watching it and you're a part of it. So I would say that, while it was not a perfect time, I still feel grateful that was, part of my experience. And I think that when we look at books, one challenge about books, and I will take, being Irish, I want to give a shout out to a great Irish author, Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, is from Dublin.
I've heard of him.
And of course, being Irish, I'm very, proud of all our men and women of letters. Dracula, the novel, has never been out of print. Most of us, I think, familiar with the character of Dracula. But adapting that book page for page and chapter for chapter would be really hard, because it's a big epic story, letters flying back and forth, and horses and carriages and castles. And, as we know, it's like it basically literally takes place across 3 continents. So how do you get that into a movie and still ring true? Well, I kind of accept the fact that Dracula, the novel, is probably going to be different from Dracula in a film. And and though Dracula, the character, has been portrayed many times in film, I would say I would definitely give some praise to Hammer's 1958 version of Dracula, which is very pared down from the novel, very streamlined. But it does allow for that film, that roughly 90-minute film, to show you the characters, show you the conflict, get you into the plot. And I'd say, that's just one example of how you can take a really broadly spread novel like Dracula and put it believably into a film. Certainly the Universal version of Dracula with Bela Lugosi in 1930 is very different in many ways from the book, but those characters, and maybe particularly Bela Lugosi's portrayal, will never leave you. So, and I would say, I mean, there's very many. I have some that I have real affection for. The original film version of War of the Worlds, again, very different from H.G. Wells's book, but I think you kind of accept that the book and the film are going to be different stories sometimes.
Yeah.
I think Toni Morrison's novel Beloved, which, by the way, anyone asks me what's your best example of a ghost story, I said just read Toni Morrison's Beloved. It's probably the best American ghost story, and in its power and presentation. And I know Oprah Winfrey had made a film adaptation that I thought was very courageous, because that again is a book telling a very, very big story. And it's a little uneven in places, but I definitely give credit that she's trying to be true to that book and to the story. And I would say another book that I think where the film adaptation is really good would be Alice Walker's The Color Purple. I think watching that film by Steven Spielberg, having read the book a couple of times before actually getting to see the film, I felt like, I feel, just speaking as myself as a viewer, I thought, I feel like this rings true to the characters in the book and the story in the book. And that being another epic, really an epic story across, again, 3 continents around the globe. And I would say, so just though, thinking immediately coming to mind, I would kind of put those, near the top of my list in terms of adaptation.
I love all of those, especially since you kind of spoke a lot about books that are epics, that are very visual, that span huge, swaths of areas.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like and very complex, memorable characters, amazing, vivid descriptions. And it's like to bring that and adapt that into a film, and the fact that the film actually worked, it's like, yes.
Exactly, because the art of film and television, I mean, that is, really, we think of it as like part of popular culture, but I'm like the biggest fan of popular culture, and I think
I love it.
Is an art form in its own right.
Yeah.
So when I see a film or a TV show, and even if it has to change up some of the elements from the original story in the book, as long as it all still carries well.
Yeah. Yes. And that the tone feels the same. Like it feels like this is what this would adapt into.
Right. It feels like, you're asking in a TV show or movie or a book for that matter, you're asking the reader to go with you on that journey. It's like you're the designated driver of the journey. So the reader, or in case of film and television, the viewer is putting their trust in you that you are going to take them on this great journey. And that's what we have to do.
And I feel like I think a good adaptation does it honors the readers, it respects the readers, it takes into consideration that the readers are trusting them to develop this content like the right way. And I think that's one of the most important things to consider when adapting a book to a movie, to consider, that the readers have had these books in their hearts basically, and that it's like, you have to do the right thing when adapting it. It has to be right. So when did you begin writing horror?
Okay. Well, I would say again that's a great question, and it does kind of takes me back to again the days of childhood. I think I started drawing and writing at a very young age as a kid, maybe 4, 5, 6 years old, and I think. And again, another thing Gen Xers like to joke about is that we are the generation of the free range children. So you're watching, speaking of television, when I was a kid, there were a couple of great shows on TV. One was Night Gallery, which was the horror television series by Rod Serling, who's also known, of course, for The Twilight Zone, which was a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
And these were basically short stories presented in a television format. And so that was on television. And there were also, I remember very clearly, a horror movie with Vincent Price. And it's a movie I still love. It was the House on Haunted Hill. And watching it as a child, it was quite terrifying, but it was also enthralling. And I think if I was to really drill down into it, it was probably around that age, and I will say, growing up Irish American, we as the Irish have an amazing legacy of literature, but also an oral tradition of storytelling and an ancient culture in which magic and the supernatural are basically facts of life. So even though my parents were very modern, and I grew up in a very modern household, you still, that ancestral legacy of the Banshee, for example. I actually learned more about the Banshee in a music class when they were playing Henry Cowell's piece, also called The Banshee. And I was terrified, like some Irish kids are, about the Banshee.
Yeah.
And I actually began to draw like comic strips to sort of work out my feelings around that. But I also found that those things enthralled me. The Scary Movie, and now, of course, we talk about, when is it, are some movies, in fact, might be a little intense, or we talk about the age appropriateness for children. And I do think that's a valid conversation to have. So I think it just goes way back. And I just started writing. I think my very first, horror stories, ghost stories that I wrote were probably about 7, 8 years old. And I sometimes feel like, now I'm just taller and older, maybe a little wiser.
Yeah.
So it's like if I guess if it's something that you're born, you're born to do, it maybe starts young.
Yeah, I think so too.
With you.
I think so too. I definitely agree exactly with that. That it's like if it's ingrained within us, it's like it's natural. Of course, it's going to come out in our behavior, our actions early on, because it's like that's who we are. That's what we're primed to do. But,
sure. Yeah, exactly. It's part of who you are, so absolutely.
Yes, I definitely agree. So this is our last question.
Okay.
Do you have any stories on the back burner just waiting to be written? And if so, if you can share, can you tell us a little bit about them?
Sure. Well, I like to think, as a writer, that I know that I have like snippets and ideas of stories in my head all the time. And some of them end up sort of blurring and blending into some other story. I think that I would like to, I do have some short stories that were variously published, and most of them back in the 90s, which was sort of a golden age for like Gothic and horror magazines and zines. It was really like the grassroots do-it-yourself age of publishing.
Yeah.
And so I was really, I feel, again, very blessed. I had a lot of stories from that time published, and I'm thinking I would like to get those together in a novel, much like Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles really began as a series of short stories that he basically, added some continuity to, again, make an epic story that, still resonates today. And I thought, well, I think I'm going to take Ray Bradbury as sort of my spiritual guide, as I often do, one of many, and hopefully get that done. And I'm talking about it somewhat circumspectly because, I want to make it happen and present it. I think I like writing stories about insects. There'll probably be more stories about insects in the future. Again, I grew up with all those great films in the 70s about killer bees and giant ants and giant grasshoppers and stuff.
And
But I think that when I think about it, I also think about that, like in reality these days, we talk about like how people used to be really afraid of the killer bees. And the sad reality is that the bees have more to fear from human activity. And so I think about, like, if we're going to write short stories about environmental, consequence, that certainly thinking and maybe rethinking our relationship to those creatures, I personally see that there's probably a great muse in telling, telling some stories that way.
I think that's wonderful. It's like something with it's entertaining, but it has a message as well. It has underlying message, and a lot of horror does have an underlying message. I've heard that it's one of the most it is one genre that communicates the most about our society, and it takes a societal facts, societal points, and it makes it more extreme. But if you take back the layers of the visuals, if you take back the layers of some of the character traits, it truly is speaking to the state of humanity in some form, in some way. And I think that makes horror itself so introspective. And that's why it's so important to have women in horror, because we see a lot of issues in society, sometimes in a unique way, that's really important to hear about. And horror is kind of a good vessel to speak those things.
I think that's really, that's definitely really true. And I think that to your point, as women, I like to think that, horror kind of really sort of evolves out of telling stories about the human condition, as being, vulnerable and frail and flawed, and having to deal with things that can be quite frightening. And I think as women, I think it's really fair to say that anywhere you go in the world, in any society, whatever the norms of that society are, women are who you will find on the front lines of whatever struggle is going on within that society. And I include our own in that.
Exactly.
And as we're winding down, of course, I would be remiss not to give a shout also to some of those great women writers, Andre Norton, Shirley Jackson, of course, Octavia Butler. I mentioned Alice Walker earlier, Toni Morrison for sure, Louise Erdrich, and there are many, many more I could name, but just, go out and read them and find them, be humbled by them, be strengthened by them. And hopefully as writers, we give some of that strength back in the stories that we have to share.
I love that. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
I actually did have one more question.
Okay, sure.
Let us know how to find out more about you, your books, and just where to find updates about everything you're doing in the future. Please.
Sure. I am on my wonderful website, megsmithwriter.com, which has an online store where you can get all my books and read a little bit about my travels and stuff like that. I'm on Instagram and TikTok at Meg Smith Writer, Facebook and Twitter, again, all Meg Smith Writer. And I love communicating on all those social media platforms. And I also have YouTube channel as well. So I invite everybody to reach out and connect with me, and because I love speaking with you, and also for all the writers out there, hearing about where your writing journey is going to take you, and maybe take me as a reader. Because I love to read as much as I love to write. To me, it's like a lifelong love story, really.
Me too. It's been a joy talking with you today for HorrorTree magazine, and just learning from you and hearing everything that you're able to share with us. And I hope that everyone enjoys, learning from this interview, and also enjoying everything that we had to say about publishing and books and horror, because it was great. It was so wonderful to meet you, and I hope that we're able to talk again eventually soon.
Me too, for sure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me in this interview series, and everybody have a great Women in Horror Writing Month.
Yes, have a great Women in Horror Writing Month.